Fields, and this is Winston, my worm. And this week we're starting a whole new series looking at the life of Elijah. Come and join us as we do that.
Flora Fields likes plants and flowers. In her garden she spends her hours with her little friend Winston, the worm, who helps the plants grow when he wriggles and squirms. So come and plant a seed, see what it yields. Let's go into the garden with Flora Fields.
Elijah is a prophet sent from God, and he was sent to his people to tell them all about God. And Chris is going to help us to see what we're going to learn about Elijah in this first week. Come and join us as we do this.
Thanks, Flora. It's great that you can join me again for another true story from the Bible. We're starting a new series looking at the life of a man called Elijah. Elijah lived about 3,000 years ago, or about 900 years before Jesus was born. At this point in the Bible, the nation of Israel had a few kings already, some of whom we've learnt about in previous series. Saul was the first king of Israel, but he turned from God, and so God made David king in his place. David did do some wrong things, but he kept turning back to God to say sorry, and so God loved David, and he was a good king. David's son Solomon became the next king, and he was very wise, and God made him really wealthy and powerful too. But Solomon's heart was led astray by all the wives he had, and so he stopped following God like he should have. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king, and he got things even worse. Therefore, as a punishment, God split the nation into two. The northern kingdom became Israel, and the southern kingdom was now called Judah, and there were kings ruling over each of them. Now Elijah was a prophet who was someone sent by God to tell people things that God wanted them to hear, even if the people listening didn't want to hear it. In today's story, Elijah is going to speak to one of the kings of Israel in the north to tell him what God thinks of his behaviour. And as we look at it together, I want you to try and answer these 4 questions. 1. What does God do to Ahab, the king? 2. What does God do for Elijah, the prophet? 3. What does God do for the widow? And 4. What does God do for the widow's son? Let's get into the story.
Elijah and the Drought. 1 Kings, chapter 16, verse 29 to chapter 17, verse 24. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel. And he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. In Ahab's time, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son, Abraham, and he set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua, son of Nun. Now Elijah, Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. "Leave here, turn eastward, and hide in the Cherith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the Cherith ravine, east of the Jordan, and stayed there. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. Some time later, the brook dried up, because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him. "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there, gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar, so I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, so that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread from me, from what you have, and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Some time later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth.
I hope you were listening well and that you enjoyed the story. Do you remember the questions I asked you at the start? What does God do to Ahab, the king? What does God do to Elijah, the prophet? What does God do for the widow? And what does God do for the widow's son? Well, God is angry with Ahab, and so he judges him and the nation he rules by causing a terrible drought. With no water or rain, it will be hard for them to grow crops or feed animals. The people will be thirsty and hungry because of their wickedness. God protects Elijah and keeps him alive by feeding him with meat and bread delivered by ravens. It may not sound all that pleasant to get your breakfast and dinner delivered from the mouth of an unclean bird, but I think it was better than starving to death. God provides for the widow and keeps her and her family alive by feeding them with an endless supply of flour and oil. What started out as a tiny amount was enough to feed them all until they needed it. God brings back to life the widow's son. Literally, his breath is given back to him. God gives life through Elijah. And the answers to these questions help us see the big picture of this passage. This passage teaches us that God will judge those who turn from him, but that God also rescues and gives life to those who trust in his word. And do you know what would have been even more amazing to the people who first heard this story? Elijah goes to a widow who lives in a different nation. She wasn't from Israel or Judah. She was a foreigner, and yet God had mercy on her too. That means that God will save and rescue anyone from anywhere, so long as they trust in his word. That means we can trust in God too, and know that he will save us just like he did to Elijah, the widow, and her son. Well, I'm going to say a short prayer now. Why don't you join with me? Father God, thank you for being so awesome and powerful that you can stop rain from falling, but also be so kind and loving that you save those who trust in you. Help us to trust in you, even when it may be hard to. Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thank you so much, Chris, for showing us the first bit of what Elijah was up to. And in fact, we learned, don't we, that for those who turn away from God and trust other gods, well, God will judge them. But for those who listen and trust him, God will provide and save them. Well, there's crafts that you can do now and songs that you can sing to. So I hope you have fun time doing that, and we will see you next week.